Welcome everyone to our virtual roundtable for Kubernetes in the enterprise. We are excited to be here today and talk about all the new and changing things around this technology. My name is Jesse, and I've been in the technology industry since last century. I'm currently serving as the chief technologist at Devada, but I got my start as a developer, just like many of you, working on the Java programming language way back in the 90s with Sun Microsystems. We've just released our latest trend report, and you can download that on dzone.com. This is the perfect place to go to see what's going on in the technical world. dzone.com is trusted by millions of developers and technical leaders every single month to keep them up to date with the latest developments in technology. I'm excited to get started, but if you'd like to send this to a friend or watch other events like this, just go to dzone.com/webinars to see all of our on-demand events. I'm excited now to introduce our panel of experts as we get started. Eric, where are you? Director, there we go. Director of Technical Marketing and Evangelism at Chronosphere. Eric, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you and for sponsoring. Arsh Sharma, Developer Experience Engineer, give us a wave. At Aptico, Ray Elentini. Where's Ray? There we go. Ray up there in the corner. So excited to have you. Solution Architect at Soltech Inc. And then Alan Hahn, you wrote the intro, and you're the Director of Software Technology at Lockheed Martin. Again, great to have you. ETech, Huang, Software Engineer at NYDIG, which is great. Dan Cerulli, Vice President of Product at D2IQ. Welcome, Dan. And last but definitely not least, Maria Nomovska, co-founder and technical writer. And I think, yeah, you founded it at Microtica. Did I say that right? Awesome. All right. So the first thing I want to get started with as we get going is we've been doing this trend report for 4 years. 4 years. We've been surveying, finding what's going on with Kubernetes in different companies. And as I looked at the data this year, you all know we have all the different data points. This is a statistical anomaly for me, and I want y'all to help me out with it. So we asked developers and their organizations, do you run any Kubernetes clusters? And yes has stalled. It's been at 75% every year for 4 years. I'm confused. What do you think has contributed to this stalled rate of growth in the adoption of Kubernetes? Dan, why don't you start us off, and then the rest of y'all can jump in. And why do you think that this has stalled, and what do you want to say to people to get them to use this technology?
I agree that it is really interesting, and frankly, it's surprising. I would say there's a couple things. One is that it is still, even as adoption is going up and up, it is still primarily new workloads that are moving over. As companies, small companies are getting started, they're all Kubernetes. Big enterprises, their new projects are Kubernetes. However, most old workloads aren't moving. And so I think that we might have reached a plateau where there's a certain percentage of the projects that weren't started in the last few years, and those things are staying where they were. And if there are companies that don't have new things, they're not running Kubernetes yet. And I think there's also a skills gap that still exists, and companies might want to adopt Kubernetes, but are simply having a hard time getting the people who could possibly help them move there.
Okay, Alan, what do you think? You wrote the intro. You've clearly got kind of a mind for everything that's going on. What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you, I've been in the technology field for a while, and we see trends come. I think making the jump from physical machines in a data center to virtual machines in a cloud. You could get into a web interface. You could click go and create a virtual machine. You could lift and shift, right? Kubernetes is not a lift and shift kind of change. It's a re-architecture. And then I think that's exactly like Dan said. There's a brilliant comment that like we're seeing new workloads move, but it's much harder to move existing workloads. And I think what I would you talked about advice to those companies. I think moving to Kubernetes does involve something of an architecture change, a design change, a different way of thinking in terms of incremental deployment of containerized services, right? So your architecture is getting smaller and more modular, but it doesn't have to do that all at once. You start with just a few things that you think would really benefit. Maybe it's the one part of your system with the highest rate of change. Maybe break that out and have it become a microservice and deploy it in Kubernetes. Try it out, get your feet wet with it a little bit. And then, over time, maybe it makes sense to move most or all of your architecture over.
Awesome. I want to do a quick poll for y'all. How many of you remember when VMware first came out? Come on, let's throw it back. Arsh and Maria, y'all win for making the rest of us look very old. So if you remember, like when VMware came out, the ESXi server, all the promises, we're going to load all this stuff up and everything's going to the cloud, back when we didn't have a clue what the cloud was. Come on, right? And everything has matured and it's gotten crazy. Right. I'll talk to some people who may have been out of technology for a while, right, when VMware was coming. And when you talk about containers and microservices, our current understanding of that is very different than what it was back then. Like if I talk to them about orchestration, they might not really know what that term is. So, you know, as we're kind of working through this question, do you think there's any confusion over that, you know, that kind of technology or something in the terminology? And Eric, I love the hats on the back wall, man. I love that. Can you want to weigh in here and give us a little bit of insight if you can? You remember back then. So yeah, lay it on us.
About the hats or about the technology?
A little bit of both. Go ahead. What's about the hats?
We'll do the hats another time. I think something that's really interesting that's kind of getting glossed over here is it's easy to talk about going into the cloud, microservices, splitting things up, deploying stuff, new workloads, old workloads, whatever the deal is. What you're forgetting is the observability side. Cloud native observability is hard. If you think running an application in the thing is hard, think about what's happening when you're observing what's going on and trying to keep track of all this stuff. I saw a thing not too long ago, a quote that was like 71% of companies are worried about the production data that they're using to make money in the cloud is being surpassed by the observability by a lot. And that workload and this effort in your organization is sucking resources over here all the time. I know that's not exactly where you wanted to go with this, but this is something that we're seeing a lot of stuff happen. And you're seeing older companies using the VMware stuff and the second generation technology. Nobody knew, you know, containers were going to take off like this and change the way the cloud looks.
Yeah, you're right.
Who knows what's coming down the road? But one thing we do know, the more you got to look at, the more you automate stuff and can scale up, scale down, and react to all kinds of stuff. How are you keeping track of this data? How are you managing this data? And the data that's coming in is often a whole bunch of stuff you're not even interested in. If you look at the standard way you deploy something like what Red Hat has with an OpenShift container platform that's in the cloud, there's things that are turned on automatically when you go to a marketplace, push a button and install something. How many logs are being pumped to you? How many metrics are being pumped to you automatically, right? It's just dumping this stuff.
Okay.
This is a big deal.
It is. And lucky for us, one of our panelists actually wrote an article about observability, and she's smiling right now because she knows I'm going to call on her, into this trend report that we just published. So Maria, what are your thoughts around what Eric just said around observability? You know, give us a little insight into this, because you clearly know a lot about it from your article.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jesse. So yeah, as Eric mentioned, I mean, cloud native observability is definitely more complex, as you have a lot of data from infrastructure and application point of view that you have coming into the system, and you need to analyze it, and you need to understand the health of the system and understand the performance of the applications. So all of these metrics and traces and logs that you need to go through actually are something that is a challenge as well when adopting Kubernetes and when working with Kubernetes by itself. So I think that expanding onto the reasons why it might be hard for companies to adopt Kubernetes is basically the complexity behind it. So coupled with also the skills and the lack of the skills and the expertise in Kubernetes. So everything coupled together actually makes it harder for developers and companies to adopt it and to have also a good observability of the Kubernetes clusters.
Okay, cool. All right, so Ray, what do you think? What do you think about this? And then I also want you to answer what kind of advice do you have for the 25% of people who are still, you know, kind of not in the boat with us?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. The one thing I was thinking about was back to the VM days, right? When they started becoming very popular. We probably could have looked at trend graphs from back then and I guess seen something pretty similar. If you were around then, you knew that there were vendors that just would not allow you to run their software on a VM. They said we don't support it, and it's not going to run. So now you're thrown into the hybrid world, right? In the hybrid world, VMs to bare metal, Kubernetes now to VMs and possibly some bare metal. The hybrid world makes this thing a lot more challenging. And I still think that there are challenges, and people will think of them challenges from the perspective of things like stateful sets in Kubernetes. How am I going to manage databases and stuff like that? I'm a proponent. I've seen it work. I know that it works, but I think there's still some people that are out there and saying, hey, well, maybe not for me. And so you end up with a hybrid environment. And then not only hybrid, in terms of VMs and Kubernetes, you got hybrid in terms of cloud and on-premise. The whole thing becomes really complicated. And so a lot of the larger organizations, I think, and maybe even some smaller ones, are thinking, do I need another stack to monitor and watch over and learn and teach my staff how to learn? Am I going to get the ROI in pivoting my organization in that direction?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, everybody, we know what kind of economic climate we're in. We've all seen the news. ROI is definitely at the top of a lot of people's minds. So that's really good. All right, before I move on, anything else anyone want to share on advice to any of these companies looking to adopt Kubernetes?
I want to echo Alan's advice: start small and start soon. And the reason is that when we have seen these waves happen in the past, and we've watched several of them, and also think languages, there comes a time right now you're thinking it's hard to hire this Kubernetes expertise, right? Yeah. There will come a time where people won't want to come work for you if they learn that they're not going to be working in Kubernetes. In fact, that time might already be here. That if I'm an operator, I'm a developer, and I'm looking at different job offers, the one where I'm going to work on the old technology is less appealing. And if you can't tell them, oh no, we're on that path too, you're going to start having a hard time hiring people. And so look at what's going to happen in the future as well. You are better off getting started now than being in a position that now you can't hire because you're one of the last 10% who are still kind of stuck in the early part of the 21st century.
That's great advice, Dan. Like, you're singing the song of my people, right? As a developer guy who loves my developers, I think about recently on the kind of the UI side, the Angular versus React thing, right? Where everybody wanted to move and we're looking for jobs. And if you didn't have that, they would go somewhere else. So that's a, interesting thing to think about in today's climate. All right. So Eric, go for it. And then
really quick one.
Since you raised your hand, I'm gonna ask you the next question too.
Okay, great. But really quick to fill in on that, I did a talk not too long ago that's been pre-recorded. It's going to come online, I think, in next week. But anyway, one of the things that was really stark, I had to dig into what developers are doing in the DevOps space, right? And I was kind of surprised. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, but if you kind of condense it and, give me a couple percentage points, errors either way, 32% of their time is spent working on new stuff. 18% is coffee machine and meetings or whatever's going on that's not got to do with coding. 50% of your time is messing around trying to get stuff deployed or fix stuff that's being deployed, or it's coming back at you out of the Kubernetes clouds. Yeah. 50% of your time. When you're DevOps is a new model, right? Where'd the dev go? It's mostly ops, right?
That's a good point.
That's the first thing. Question, second thing.
So the second thing, the subtitle of this report was Beyond Container Reimagined, right? That's our subtitle that we put on this thing. So as you think about that though, I want to know, most of you have witnessed Kubernetes be more than just container orchestration, right? So how did it benefit you at Chronosphere? Like, what kind of benefit are you seeing from this technology, from Kubernetes?
Well, we exist because of this. So we're like a third generation monitoring organization. So reaching back to what Maria was saying about the three pillars, we like to think a little bit beyond that because we've evolved a little bit farther than just talking about technology. Logs, tracing, and metrics, that's technology. And if you want to speak to people about their real problems, you have to talk about their process they go through. You need to know as fast as possible when something's going wrong. You need to be able to triage it. And within those two steps, somewhere remediate it. Get the problem fixed, right? As fast as possible without going through 15 different dashboards or 15 different applications. The final thing is you need to have to be able to do root cause analysis and come back with some kind of understanding so it never happens again. KTU, we talk about all the time. The second thing is because of the complexity you're involved with, and I talked about that data you're doing for your operations and the data that's being flooded at you because of this stuff, having some kind of controls around that stuff and not putting all your resources into managing the infrastructure that's going around the observability side leads to companies like us where it's a SaaS. It's taken out of your hands. So you've started off as both Dan and Alan said that you're easing into the cloud and you're seeing the data start to go and you start building that infrastructure. Hopefully you've used open standards and open technologies and started to build your infrastructure that way so that you now have the ability to replace it by just redirecting it to one of these SaaS providers when you get to that large scale where you really don't want your resources and your focus on that anymore.
Awesome. All right. So Etek, same question for you, right? Thank you, first of all, for writing your article, right? I think yours was on Helm charts, but so how do you all use Kubernetes and what does it mean to you guys? Why is it valuable?
Yeah, I think for me, Kubernetes has unlocked a lot of the developer sandbox experience that's more closer to production. So as a software developer who doesn't want to have to dealing with Helm charts or the deployments, now I can do that in a deployed shared cluster or with Minikube or some sort of local environment so that the iteration cycles are a lot quicker than say everyone gets provisioned the EC2 machine, wait for all the updates to happen, and it takes hours to recycle that. Now it's like seconds.
That's huge. And, I remember going through a bunch of efficiencies back when we had like build engineers, right? It would take 3 days to build things on these big Manila machines. And to your point, we were doing some automation, and this is automation with K-shell scripts, y'all, building on an AIX machine. But the point is we saved 15 minutes. And one of my developers raised his hand and said, but you only saved me 15 minutes. I said, how many times do you check in and build in a week? Right? So these little, and the efficiency, I think, is what you're getting at. And what everybody needs to keep in mind is when Etek is telling us that you're saving this amount of time, multiply that over the deployments, especially when you're running 2-week sprints and you're pumping stuff out all the time. It gets really big, really quick. Great insight. Arsh, you've been kind of quiet. Same question to you. How are you guys using that, and what kind of benefit are you seeing from this technology?
Yeah, so I think for us at Octata, we have a very interesting perspective to how Kubernetes has helped us. So we run our SaaS product on Kubernetes. So basically we run and manage clusters for our customers who choose the SaaS offering. So I can answer this from their perspective. And this also relates to the previous question we were talking about. And that's we have helped customers migrate their monoliths to microservices and running Kubernetes. And the response has just been overwhelmingly positive. So they have seen everyone talks about the standard benefits of running a container orchestrator, avoiding downtime and easier scaling and all that. But the unique take which you were talking about right now, what we have seen is that they have reported how much easier development has gotten them for because with a lot with Kubernetes, a lot of people we are seeing they're using it to run their dev environments as well. So just because how easy Kubernetes makes running loads at scale, this type of infrastructure, these realistic dev environments we are talking about, is now much more easier. So we have developer people who use the product, they do not have to configure anything, right? You were just talking about having to configure an EC2 instance or everything. Yeah. So just that freeing developers from the ops side of things and having them focus on just writing code, that has been a game changer for us.
That's huge. And you're really boots on the ground. You're boots on the ground on that 25%, helping people. I love that. You're actually out there trying to make it happen. So kudos to you. And the other thing that came to mind, and it goes back into whoever was saying dev and ops earlier, but Atlassian put out one of their first state of developer reports earlier in the year. And this whole you build it, you run it, right? I remember when dev and ops were two completely separate things, and developers were more under the CTO and the CIO was more building, right? So way back in the day. And now it's kind of all come together, which is super interesting. But thanks for sharing that. That was pretty cool. Anything else? I got another question, metrics and history question coming up next. Ray, go for it.
Yeah, if I could just, so I've introduced Kubernetes as a development pattern in multiple organizations now. And interestingly enough, I think, and this has been exactly the same in every organization, not all the engineering teams buy into this, right? Because they have to learn ops, quite frankly, right? And it's all about the shift left movement. It's about the fact that, hey, you're writing the code, you need to know how to deploy this code and what it's doing in production. And and it gets the dev and ops people at the table together. Part of the article that I wrote is the fact is that this is an opportunity to make the whole CI/CD pipeline a lot smoother once you get the developers on board. The ops teams, DevOps teams are all for this, right? Once the engineers are on board, then you start realizing how fast the pipeline moves, starting with Kubernetes on the workstation, going all the way up. Everybody's like, this is really cool. At the same time, it has to be easy for the developers. Itek said, whether it's Helm charts or whatever, it needs to be a one-button deployment on that developer's machine. They don't want to learn Kubernetes all up front. They'll learn it little bits at a time, perhaps. But they want to. But here, you deploy this on Kubernetes. I'm just going to use this one command, awesome. and then it really helps through it.
And that's to your point. And I know, Dan, you and Eric both want to say something. Eric, you go first. Dan, you finish up, and then I have a follow-up question for Alan to start on. So go for it, Eric.
I don't want to monopolize. I'll keep it really quick, but I thought it was super relevant. I just got into a Reddit thread where some guy reached out, and you could almost hear his desperation, where he's saying like, wow, I just discovered these traces in OTel or OpenTelemetry, and this could be interesting. Is anybody else doing this? And it's the DevOps story, right? The first comment just made my day, because I mean, I feel bad for the guy, but you can imagine like this desperate, old, sad, oh God, I've been here before kind of voice. And I'll read you the quote itself. It says, I put it on a slide, it's awesome. I don't yet collect spans or traces because I can hardly get our devs to care about basic metrics, let alone traces. Cultivating a culture of engineering that cares about availability is a challenge that we need to solve alongside any technical implementations. I think that pretty much is where it's at when you think about the DevOps. You hear this all the time.
It's evolution, right? I still know developers who develop something, then send it to QA, right? Not even doing test-driven development first. They send it to QA, and then QA sends it to be built. And you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I totally get that. All right, Dan.
No. I think we've covered it. I say we move to the next one.
Awesome. Okay, so this one is my next question, right? According to the respondents in our poll this year, the number one improvement using Kubernetes is for CI/CD. Thanks for throwing that term in there, Ray. I'll give you $5 afterwards. And that came in at 74%. Now, last year it was 61% and 64% in 2020. So this is the biggest jump in that answer year over year. Do you agree with this data point? And I am going to make you say why or why not. But they say that's the number one improvement is for CI/CD. Do you agree, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I said the same thing myself. And that's really an area. I think it ties really well into your previous question about where have you seen Kubernetes be more? One of the unique features of our industry is the need to support not just a kind of centralized development environment for all of our development teams, but hundreds of separate environments because of the need for controlled data in different environments, and the ability to just say, if I can just get you to a Kubernetes cluster, I can be confident that this stack of tools will work on top of that. The processes that we'll be able to enable with that, since obviously tools will only get you so far. If I can just get you to the point that you have a Kubernetes cluster, I can make all kinds of assumptions about containerized build, being able to turn builds around quickly, being able to incorporate, really good automated test and security scanning into your pipelines. And I can do that out into these, multiple individual separate environments that I don't necessarily have visibility into. And that, I think even for teams that, going back to the first question, even for teams that can't make that jump yet to containers in production, my goodness, please, give it a shot. Try and run your build in containers, because it will make your life so much easier. It will make, hopefully, your security people a lot less worried about software supply chain attacks, because you can just kill and restart your development environments on every build. And I mean, just, please try that. We have certainly found that to be enormously valuable.
That's awesome. Y'all join Arsh and Alan, begging you, all of you out there, to please, switch over. You'll like it. eTech told us, some of the value of it. So I love that. Maria, do you agree? You think it's CI/CD, or you think it's something else?
I do agree. I think that one of the reasons that this has happened in the past few years is that companies are becoming more aware, I think, of the benefits of Kubernetes, but also the necessity of having continuous integration and delivery. And tools are actually becoming now more available and affordable. So as well as the technology itself, I mean, one thing I could mention here is the adoption of GitOps as a Kubernetes native way to implement CI/CD. I mean, the GitOps and the tools that have emerged for GitOps, like Argo and Flux, they are Kubernetes native, and compared with traditional CI/CD tools, where you had to have some trade-offs if you wanted to implement them with Kubernetes. Now it's much easier, and it's an ecosystem that is rapidly developing, I think, in that direction. So
That's
it
awesome.
makes sense. I think the numbers make sense.
Yeah,
way.
and you said GitOps, everybody's yes. Eric, go for it. Yeah, come on, chime in.
I was gonna say, I mean, we quickly forget that the basis of Kubernetes was giving you the ability to configure how you want your system to look, right? What you want to happen out there, basically. And so that whole testing process got really, really hard, because you don't know whether it's a line of your configuration or it's the app or the, you know what I mean? It's really difficult that way. And things like GitOps and things like that, tools have been put in place now that make that syncing a whole lot more sure and a whole lot more stable.
Got it. But now I have a new question. And this one was ranked rather low, and has been low actually for the last few years, from respondents. And the question goes around security. How many of you deal with security, or think about security, or know somebody who has to deal with security? Everybody, right? We're in software, so security is top of mind. Managers, executives, everybody's asking about it. But the question revolved around Kubernetes' ability to improve organization security, coming in at like 29% in terms of positive response over the last 3 years. So do you agree with this data point or not? And can you shed any insights? And eTech, I think, you look like you got something to say, so lay it on us, man.
Yeah, I actually wrote about security in last year's trend report on Kubernetes. So I think there's two things that are really hard for developers. One is Kubernetes adds another layer of things to protect. So now you have infrastructure, you got containers, you got Kubernetes infrastructure. So that's just a lot more layers that someone has to care about. And then as this whole shift left to the movement is happening, developers don't want to learn about security on top of all the stuff, DevOpsy stuff that they have to now do. So I feel like it's just getting the lower priority on their attention span. So it's hard for the security folks to say, hey, security is really important and we need to build out from the ground up.
Mm-hmm. And when Shift left and talking about DevOps, we've kind of gone around that, but that's the first time anyone's used that term, right? And so explain that for the audience, if you will.
Yeah, traditionally, if you thought dev and ops are two separate entities, now they want the developers to also do the traditionally operational stuff. So caring about builds, testing, QA, security.
So for all you developers out there that, now you got to do test-driven development and you got to learn how to deploy, that is what shift left means from eTech. So Dan, you wanted to get in here on this one too, on security. So what are your thoughts around this one?
So what's interesting about this is that these companies that kind of pioneered the use of containers internally, I spent 7 years at Google, are extremely secure companies and understand that these sorts of container orchestration platforms with sidecars and service meshes can be run in a zero trust, extremely secure way. However, I think that Maria and Eric both talked about how old observability tools they don't work well with this new architecture. The same is true of security. And the things that we used to do to secure things, which were largely IP based, right? You put a firewall up and you only allow traffic to that IP, to that port, and you pay attention to IPs. None of that makes sense in an ephemeral world. And with the containerization and supply chain security, all the concepts are new. And so I think security orgs are looking at Kubernetes and saying, I don't know what to do here. I think that just like with observability, the vendor ecosystem on top of the open source platforms are really stepping up to say, oh no, you can do this, you can do it really well. But security organizations have to understand it's not the way you secured things in the 90s and in the 2000s. It's new and it's different. You're going to learn, but you implement a great CI/CD process, by the way. Even that shift left can be transparent to your developers, right?
Yeah.
Your CI/CD process can make sure that everything that gets deployed is very secure.
And so that's one of those things, my follow-up question, and then Eric, I'll get to you and Alan. But one of the things that you just mentioned that can be done in a company, right, to improve their confidence around security is to educate, right? Educating people about how to do this and how it's different. Everybody knows it's important, just developers kind of push back on it because it's hard and it's something else on their plate. So all those efficiencies, that's a way to sell the developers and improve the culture, which I love. So thanks for that, Dan. All right, Eric.
Yeah, really quickly, how many people here remember the early days of containers when developers were making their own images and they were plugging in very interesting calls to Dropbox and things like that, right? I'll tell you an even better one because we're years down the road now, and I was at a customer that the company I worked at the time couldn't get an issue supported on containers. They had used somebody to write this container manifest to make this image, and they'd basically taken a verified one because most of the vendors, as Dan mentioned, now are getting into the supply chain security stuff around images and verifying and ensuring that if you get them from their registry that you're getting a secure container image. And but this one had cracked it open and decided to pull a bunch of stuff in to be run on top of that, which is basically this is not how it works. You're supposed to use the image that does that for you, not like pile it on top of in the user directory and start hacking around. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I was looking at him going, can you do this? This is awesome. This works. It's crazy some of the stuff you see developers doing, which is sort of what Yitek was saying. You give them a playground, you give them a chance to do stuff, they get really creative really fast.
Yeah. Let's share all of our password. Just Slack me the password; it'll be fine. All right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail us. Alan, I'm going to switch topics here for just a little bit, and I want to get you, Ray and Arshin on this one. But 94% respondents, so a high response, feel Kubernetes is going to be a bigger part of system design at their companies over the next couple of years, right? And I know that you were talking, reason I wanted to start with you in your intro to the trend report, talked a little bit about how it's growing and the excitement coming, into the future, and as we got a few more minutes left here, that's kind of where I'm going to shift the conversation. So why don't you kick us off? Do you agree with this sentiment? I think you do because of what you wrote, but feel free to be contrarian. But as things become bigger within the systems and more of the use of Kubernetes, kind of what do you see coming, right?
Yeah, I think, for us, we're in that 94%. I think the opportunity to put Kubernetes clusters in places we can't put them today, pushing Kubernetes out toward the edge. It is not just a cloud data center technology. It is an enabler for the use of similar architecture patterns, all the way out into the edge, and super excited about the opportunity for that. I do think, I 100% agree with exactly what Dan said about the security issues. Once we understand that the same security values that we had, the same security priorities that we had are still important. They're just implemented in a different way. And actually what we find is that with containers, we have some techniques we can use that we couldn't ever do before, some immutability and some, really locking things down, not in terms of IP, but in terms of behavior. I mean, there's just some amazing opportunity that's going to, I think, make us want to push Kubernetes out into edge environments where we haven't traditionally been able to run these kinds of capabilities. And I'm excited about that. Awesome.
All right, Ars, do you agree? Or are you more contrarian?
Yep. I totally agree with that. I feel like the idea of breaking down the monoliths we had into microservices is very powerful. And we have all, I think, realized that it's a convenient way of developing applications. And Kubernetes just works brilliantly with microservices. And I don't think like we have a tool or there is a need for another tool at this point, which does as efficient of a job as Kubernetes is at running these microservices at scale. So I totally agree on that. But to add on to that, I think what we'll see with Kubernetes in the future is that all of these things which come in the ecosystem, all the Kubernetes related processes, we'll see them getting shifted more left and like right to the developers. And it only makes sense, right? Like if your production is on Kubernetes, then everything else like dev, test, staging, CI/CD should also be there, right? Because we've always agreed that the dev environment and like needs to be close to production to avoid bugs and all.
Oh yeah.
And this is something like we can like back it up. Like we've been seeing this with most of our customers. So they started with prod, but now they're also moving CI, security analysis, QA, and dev environments, everything to Kubernetes. So yeah, I think it's going to play a bigger role.
Very cool. All right. So this is going to be one of my last questions, maybe my last one. We're running out of time, but I want to give everybody a shot to answer this one. So those of you in the beginning, are going to be more on the spot than those of you in. I love watching everybody get a little bit nervous because they don't know what I'm going to ask. But really, it's just advice, right? Whenever you get a panel of experts, you have all been doing this. You're experts at it. You're writing articles about it. You're leading the charge at your companies or in the industry or both for some of you. But as we wrap it up, what advice are you going to want to give out to our audience, these developers and tech leaders who are new to Kubernetes, and where do what do you get excited about in the future? So advice, well, give me the future first. Where do you see it going? And then what advice do you have for people getting started? And Dan, you'll be up first. You've already given me like 3 things I'm going to make a t-shirt out of. So why don't you, so why don't you start us off and lay it on us, man?
So my prediction, along with what Alan was saying, my prediction is that 10 years from now, Kubernetes containers is the standard way to package code, and Kubernetes is the standard way to run it, or something that looks like Kubernetes, regardless of where that is. And I mean all of the data centers, and I mean all of the devices, I mean all the vehicles, I mean what you're wearing on your wrist. Containers are just that good at packaging something up so you can put it somewhere, you can replace it with a new version safely, you can roll back if you need to. So over the next 10 years, just like VMs took over all the data centers, Kubernetes will take over all of that's what all the cores will be running. So my advice is do get in. My advice is look for the vendor solutions on top of open source. What happens in the CNCF is fantastic. It is an amalgamation of loosely affiliated open source projects, and you have to understand that doesn't mean everything works together perfectly. So find where you need help and seek that help, but do get on that train, because as I said, you don't want to be the last one at the station. So
yeah. And I love how you said it earlier, like way back in the beginning, start little, but start. I love that. So thanks a lot. All right, Alan, what are your thoughts? Like, give us a little bit about future and then some advice for newcomers.
Yeah, it's hard to follow that. That was really good. I think.
Well, I called on him first too.
Yeah. Harder for everybody else now. The one of the things that I emphasized in the welcome letter is that there is a lot of stability that has come into the Kubernetes core APIs. The core concepts of Kubernetes are relatively well understood now, and so don't be afraid of don't feel like you can absolutely start with Kubernetes with just like doing cloud-based and GUI kind of web interface deployments of applications. Yeah, that's great, but don't be afraid to look at those core constructs that make the thing work, because the better you understand those core concepts, the easier it's going to be to learn about the next great thing that comes on top of it. Exactly like Dan said, there's a dozens of different CNCF projects out there that work on top of Kubernetes in some way. If you understand the core Kubernetes concepts, you'll have a really easy time picking those up. Don't feel like you have to know what all those do on day one.
Awesome, man. Good advice. Etek.
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to more adoption of Kubernetes at the edge. So being from the IoT and financial industry, that's where I've seen most of the adoption happening and most of the challenges being there still. And my advice for companies is start small. Like, you don't have to go with a full-blown Kubernetes cluster with service mesh and all these plugins. You can just go with a managed vendor and just have a small cluster and then learn your way to the top, because you'll just get the benefits of the managed services, and then you can add in the customizations later.
Awesome. All right. So we introduced Maria last, so I don't want you to go last. So why don't you go next?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with everything said. I would also have the same advice. So start with more managed solutions and on cloud providers that have them, so you can quickly experience the value of Kubernetes, and then you can move to more clouds that give you more flexibility, that are bigger clouds. I also feel that the evolution of Kubernetes is that it will become part of the underlying fabric for clouds and services who don't want to expose the complexities of Kubernetes. Yeah. So I think we also had this article contributed to the Kubernetes report of actually being a server for serverless. So I think that might be the future of how Kubernetes will be adopted to be easier to use, more developer friendly, and more abstracted in a way.
Fascinating. All right. I'm glad you shared that. Arsh, last thoughts, man.
Yeah, so I wanted to add this earlier also, but like an interesting thing which I see happening with Kubernetes is I think we would see it like grow as a control plane beyond container orchestration as well. So I like the idea of declarative system management, which comes with Kubernetes, and the whole idea of having a control loop is very powerful. So if people are familiar, like projects like Crossplane, which leverage that idea and allow you to like apply that control loop to your cloud infra, I think we'll see a lot of that, and Kubernetes growing as like just the idea of control loop growing. And talking about advice for developers, I would say that my biggest advice is like to not be overwhelmed and just to leverage the vast ecosystem and the great community around it. Like there are a lot of like tools now in the CNCF landscape apart from Kubernetes, which help you just migrate to Kubernetes or run loads on Kubernetes, or Argo CD when it comes to like CI/CD and Kubernetes. So just leverage that ecosystem, because moving applications to Kubernetes is like a paradigm shift, and developers need to change a lot of things with that. They need to change how they develop applications. They need to change CI/CD. So there are a bunch of tools, totally leverage them. Perfect.
All right, Ray.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. We talked about VMs, before, and to Dan's point, and even so, I've started coding in Java before it was released, and because I wrote for 12 Unix platforms at the time, and compiling all of that stuff was a pain. And so you think of Java, you think of virtual machines. To Dan's point, now you think of Kubernetes. Nobody thinks anything about Java and virtual machines. They're just utilitarian now, right? Kubernetes, I think, is heading in the same place. All those, if you remember, those two had some pretty rocky starts, right? Getting into the business world, just the next thing. The other thing too, in terms of new developers, and my submission had to be was on microservices, is that it's really evolutionary. Your best practices, your computer science, your architecture, your design for microservices, if you're running on VMs already, it's not a huge lift to the internals of your working software. It actually makes things a lot easier, like metrics reporting and things like that. So I do think it's not like, oh, I've got to throw my microservice away, I have to throw my code away. Heck, we put monoliths on Kubernetes when we first started, app servers. So you can do it by evolving there without having to, throw out everything from where you are. Everything in this industry is an evolution, and this is just the next evolution. Although it's a revolution from a business perspective, it's evolutionary from a technology perspective.
Yeah. All right, Eric, wrap us up.
Oh my gosh, are you guys crazy? Has anybody, let's do a quick poll. Raise your hand if you've written a prediction for 1 year ahead. An article that predicts what's going to happen next year. Anybody done that before? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
How right were you? 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road. Now you're telling me 10 years down the road, this is going to be the stuff. If I go back and look, I've been through two 10-year periods in IT. When I first got here, COBOL was the legacy stuff. If you could program COBOL, you have a job for life. Now it's if you can do VMs, you have a job for life, right? Somebody's going to have VM out there somewhere. Nobody knows how to do that stuff. And 10 years down the road, God knows what it's going to look like. Nobody 3 years ago could predict containers would even exist, right? So I don't know about 10 years down the road if it's all going to be looking like it is now, and everybody's going to be on the happy train out to the edge with Kubernetes and all that kind of stuff. But I will say that if I was giving anybody advice, the crawl, walk, run idea is the way to go. And I think people are coming to a realization right now, as far as the amount of data that's being thrown at them, the control they don't have, the cost effect that has on you from the way they build in clouds. People are slowing down on some of this stuff to get a better control over what they're doing. And I think that's sanity starting to settle in so that the business models can actually scale and actually grow. Technology can scale and go crazy, but someone's got to pay for this, right? And the way this stuff works, it needs to be a little bit more under the control of the user and not under the control of the cloud providers, is the way I would like to frame that. So that's my closing statement. No predictions for 10 years down the road. That's insanity.
Well, I just said future. I never said 10 years. You're going to tell me what you think is going to happen next week and be right.
I'm just going with Dan
Tell
10
you.
years. I was like, wow, you brave man.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's virtual roundtable on Kubernetes in the enterprise. We had a great time when we heard some good advice from our panelists who are experts in the field. They contributed to our latest trend report that you can get at dzone.com. You can also go there to take advantage of some of the suggestions that they gave us. First of all, get started. You can start small, but don't be afraid to get in there and get started with Kubernetes. Download that trend report and participate in the community. I love how they said, don't forget, there's a lot of people out there that are ready to help you get started. You can find a lot of those people on dzone.com. The ROI is there. You'll prove it to your company. And there's a whole bunch of people that are ready to help you get started. I did want to give a special thanks to our sponsors, Chronosphere, Octito, and D2IQ. And also, big thanks to all of our panelists. You're all great. Thank you for contributing to today, as well as contributing to our trend report. If you'd like to send this to a friend or watch other events like this, go to dzone.com/webinars. You can click this link right here to see all of our on-demand events. Lastly, please stay on for a short survey. We'd love to hear your feedback.